Vera had always thought that getting captured by hostile aliens would involve more screaming and less bureaucratic inefficiency. Here she was, zip-tied to a metal chair in what could generously be called a holding cell, though rust bucket with delusions of grandeur might be more accurate, watching her captors argue about proper prisoner processing procedures. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The Nefac consortium, it turned out, was big on military precision, but apparently sketchy on the finer points of xenocide logistics. You sure this one's even worth the arena fees? The guard speaking looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a bad attitude and given it opposable thumbs. His partner, equally charming, poked at Vera with what appeared to be a cattle prod designed by someone who'd never seen cattle but had strong opinions about electrical voltage. "War Commander's orders," Rhino Face replied, checking a tablet that looked like it had survived at least 3 small wars. "Says humans are supposed to be entertaining when they panic." Vera almost laughed. If they wanted panic, they'd picked the wrong Xenobiologist. Growing up on Kepler 442b had been educational in ways most people couldn't appreciate. When your backyard contains creatures that could easily audition for nightmares, you learn to read body language, territorial displays, and predator behavior with the kind of precision usually reserved for quantum physics. The Nefac, despite their impressive collection of spikes, claws, and attitude problems, were displaying classic dominance posturing mixed with uncertainty markers. They were nervous. Good. The ship lurched, artificial gravity compensators struggling with whatever maneuver they were pulling. Through the single porthole, Vera caught glimpses of what looked like a massive space station. Angular, brutal architecture that screamed, "We have serious compensation issues," in 12 different alien languages. Her research vessel, the Curiosity, was probably debris by now. Her crew. She pushed that thought down hard. Grieving would have to wait. Survival came first, and despite appearances, she had no intention of becoming anyone's entertainment. "Move, soft skin." The cattle prod made contact with her shoulder, delivering a jolt that would have dropped most civilians. Vera had been shocked by a Kepler thunder eel once during field research. This was barely a tickle by comparison. She stood anyway. No point in advertising her pain tolerance just yet. The corridor beyond her cell looked like someone had decorated a spaceship using intimidating but impractical as their design philosophy. Excessive metal spikes, dramatic lighting, and enough skulls to stock a small museum. The Nefac clearly subscribed to the "if you're not overcompensating, you're not trying hard enough" school of interior design. Other prisoners occupied cells along the corridor. Most looked terrified. A reasonable response, all things considered. A few species she recognized from her xenobiology studies. Altarian merchants, probably grabbed during a trade route raid. Some Centauri refugees who'd had the misfortune of being in the wrong star system at the wrong time. Even what appeared to be a draconian military officer, though how the Nefac had managed that particular capture was anyone's guess. "Processing complete," announced a voice that sounded like it had been run through a blender and seasoned with gravel. War Commander Huleth emerged from a side corridor, and Vera immediately understood why the guards had been nervous. Huleth was what happened when evolution decided that menacing was a survival trait worth investing in heavily. 9 feet of muscle, chitin, and barely controlled violence, with eyes that suggested he viewed other sentient beings as particularly entertaining insects. The kind of individual who probably practiced his intimidating stare in mirrors and considered genocide a hobby. "The human xenobiologist," he said, voice carrying that particular tone reserved for discussing something moderately distasteful found on one's boot. "Your species fascinates me. So fragile, yet so persistent." Vera kept her expression neutral. "Persistent is one way to put it." "Indeed." Huleth circled her slowly, clearly enjoying the theater of the moment. "Your ship's database made for interesting reading. Interspecies communication specialist. Animal behavior expert. How? Appropriate." The way he said "appropriate" made Vera's skin crawl, but she'd learned long ago that showing fear to predators, biological or otherwise, was roughly equivalent to sending them an engraved invitation to make your day significantly worse. "I suppose you're wondering about your fate," Huleth continued, apparently under the impression that dramatic pauses were intimidating rather than just slightly annoying. "The Nefac have ancient traditions. Combat, glory, the testing of worthiness through trial by combat. Sounds charming." "Oh, it is." Huleth's approximation of a smile revealed teeth that could probably double as industrial cutting tools. Though perhaps not for the participants. "You see, we've recently acquired some special creatures, pack hunters, telepathically linked, bred for killing." Vera's xenobiologist instincts perked up despite the circumstances. Telepathically linked pack hunters? That was actually fascinating from a biological perspective, assuming she lived long enough to appreciate the science. "The Vorthak cubs have been eager for fresh prey," Huleth continued. "3 of them. Young, hungry, and absolutely without mercy. They've dispatched 8 prisoners in the last month, always in under 10 minutes. Cubs." Vera filed that information away carefully. Cubs meant juveniles. Juveniles meant different behavioral patterns, different motivations, different approaches to threat assessment. They also meant, "When do we begin this charming cultural exchange?" she asked. "Tomorrow. The arena holds 5,000 spectators, and tickets are already sold out. The betting pools are quite active. Current odds have you lasting approximately 90 seconds before they tear you apart." 90 seconds? That seems optimistic. Huleth laughed, a sound like grinding metal with delusions of humor. "I like you, human. You maintain composure in the face of certain death. It will make the spectacle more satisfying." As the guards escorted her toward what she assumed were better accommodations, though given Nefac aesthetic preferences, better was probably relative, Vera's mind was already working through possibilities. Cubs, pack hunters, telepathically linked. Most people would be planning escape routes or final words. Vera was thinking about behavioral psychology and wondering if anyone had bothered to study Vorthak social structures before throwing them into combat arenas. Probably not. Military types rarely appreciated the subtleties of interspecies communication. Their loss. 24 hours later, Vera found herself standing in an arena that looked like someone had crossed the Roman Colosseum with a maximum security prison and let a committee of sadists handle the interior decorating. 5,000 Nefac spectators filled the tiered seating, their collective roar creating a sound like a hurricane having an argument with a freight train. Above her, floating viewing platforms held what appeared to be Nefac nobility. Bigger, more ornate, and somehow even more convinced of their own superiority than the regular crowd. Vera stretched her shoulders and took stock of her situation. The arena floor was roughly the size of a football field, covered in what looked like sand, but probably wasn't anything that innocent. Scattered around the perimeter were obstacles, broken pillars, metal barriers, and what appeared to be the remains of previous entertainment sessions. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted bloodthirsty psychopaths. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena with the kind of theatrical flair usually reserved for circus ringmasters with serious personality disorders. Today, we present a special exhibition. One human xenobiologist versus our most prized hunting pack. The crowd's enthusiasm reached levels that would have impressed a small riot. Vera waved politely at the nearest section of spectators, which seemed to confuse them. Apparently, condemned prisoners weren't supposed to acknowledge their audience with anything resembling good humor. Our human subject has been judged unworthy of quick death, the announcer continued, clearly enjoying himself. Instead, she will face trial by combat against 3 vorac cubs, bred from birth for killing, trained in pack hunting tactics, and absolutely without mercy. Cubs. There was that word again. Vera filed it away next to her growing collection of potentially useful information. Release the hunters. 3 gates around the arena's perimeter began grinding open with mechanical precision that would have been impressive if it wasn't being used to facilitate her probable dismemberment. Then the vorac emerged, and Vera had to admit they were genuinely magnificent creatures. Each stood roughly chest-high to a human, built like someone had crossed a large cat with a wolf, and given the result an extra set of legs and a serious attitude problem. Their fur was deep midnight blue, shot through with silver patterns that seemed to shift and flow as they moved. 6 legs gave them an unnaturally fluid gait, and their heads were clearly designed by evolution with one specific purpose in mind: killing things efficiently. But here's what the bloodthirsty audience missed, what the Nefac handlers had apparently never bothered to notice, and what made Vera's xenobiologist heart skip a beat with something that wasn't quite fear. These weren't adults. Oh, they were dangerous enough. Claws that could probably peel armor plating, teeth designed for ripping rather than chewing, and that peculiar way of moving that suggested they could go from standing still to removing your face in approximately 0.5 seconds. But they were juveniles, teenagers, essentially, and teenage predators, regardless of species, had behavioral patterns that were significantly different from their adult counterparts. The crowd expected a bloodbath. The Nefac nobles were already placing additional bets on how many pieces Vera would be in when this was over. Instead, they got confused, because Vera sat down. Not dramatically, not with any grand gestures or final words. She simply lowered herself to a cross-legged position in the center of the arena and waited. The 3 vorac cubs, who had been advancing with what was probably supposed to be terrifying coordination, stopped. Vera could practically feel the collective confusion radiating from the audience. This wasn't in the script. Prey was supposed to run, fight, or at least scream creatively. Sitting down and looking mildly interested was not on the approved list of victim behaviors. The cubs exchanged glances, and there it was, that telepathic communication Huleth had mentioned. Subtle shifts in posture, ear positions, and something Vera couldn't quite see but could definitely sense. They were talking to each other. What is it doing? The smallest of the 3, clearly the runt of the litter, tilted its head in a gesture that would have been adorable if not for the impressive collection of fangs it was displaying. The middle cub, sleek and probably female based on bone structure, took a cautious step forward. Her body language screamed uncertainty, mixed with predatory instinct and something else, curiosity. The third cub, definitely male, and probably the pack's muscle, circled left with the kind of fluid grace that suggested he could probably climb walls if the mood struck him. But even his movement patterns were off. Too hesitant. Too careful. These weren't confident apex predators. These were confused, possibly frightened teenagers who had been thrown into a situation they didn't understand and told to perform for an audience that wanted blood. Vera slowly extended her right hand, palm up, in what she hoped was a universally recognized, non-threatening gesture. The audience's confusion was becoming audible. Scattered conversations rippled through the stands as spectators tried to figure out why their entertainment was stalling. The smallest cub took a step forward. Then another. Its siblings flanked it protectively. But they weren't advancing anymore. They were investigating. "Fascinating," Vera murmured, keeping her voice low and steady. "You're not killers at all, are you? You're just scared kids who've been taught that violence is the only option." The little one was close enough now that Vera could see the intelligence in its eyes. Real intelligence, not just predatory cunning. And something else that made her heart clench with recognition. Loneliness. These cubs weren't just separated from their natural pack structure. They were isolated from their own species' social development. Kept in cages, probably. Trained to fight, but never taught to hunt properly. Never shown the complex social behaviors that made pack hunters successful. They were as much prisoners as she was. The smallest cub extended its neck, nostrils flaring as it caught her scent. No aggression markers. Pure curiosity mixed with something that might have been hope. "Easy there, little one," Vera whispered, keeping perfectly still. "I'm not going to hurt you." Above them, the crowd was getting restless. This wasn't the savage entertainment they'd paid for. Scattered boos began echoing through the arena. War Commander Huleth appeared at his private viewing platform, and even from this distance, Vera could tell he was not pleased with the current program schedule. The middle cub, the female, moved closer. Her approach was careful, calculated, and absolutely nothing like a hunting pattern. This was pure investigative behavior, the kind of cautious social interaction that young mammals used to determine friend or foe status. When she was close enough to touch, she did something that made the entire arena fall silent. She lay down. Not in a hunting crouch. Not in an attack position. She lay down in a classic submissive posture and looked up at Vera with eyes that held entirely too much intelligence for anyone's comfort. The crowd's silence stretched for perhaps 10 seconds before erupting into chaos. What followed could generously be described as pandemonium, with a side order of complete institutional breakdown. The audience went from confused murmuring to outright shouting in approximately 3 seconds. Bets were being disputed, drinks were being thrown, and at least 2 minor brawls had broken out in the upper sections. The Nefac, it seemed, were not particularly gracious when their entertainment failed to meet advertised specifications. War Commander Huleth was gesturing wildly at arena handlers positioned around the perimeter. Even from her position on the sand, Vera could read his body language clearly enough. Fix this situation immediately, or find yourself on the wrong end of some very pointed career counseling. The handlers responded with the kind of professional enthusiasm usually reserved for people who enjoyed their jobs and planned to keep them. Energy prods appeared. Longer, nastier versions of the cattle prod she'd been introduced to yesterday. "No," Vera said quietly, but her voice carried across the arena with surprising clarity. The female cub, still lying submissively beside her, lifted her head. The smallest cub, who had been inching forward with the kind of cautious curiosity that characterized intelligent juveniles everywhere, froze. The male, their unofficial muscle, shifted his position so he was between his siblings and the approaching handlers. "You heard the War Commander!" The lead handler, A particularly unpleasant specimen who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts and bad attitude activated his energy prod. "Make them attack, or we'll do it for them!" He jabbed the prod toward the smallest cub. Vera moved faster than she'd moved in years. She didn't think about it, didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. One moment she was sitting cross-legged in philosophical contemplation. The next she was on her feet with her arms spread wide, positioning herself directly between the handler and the cubs. "Touch them and lose the arm," she said, with the kind of calm certainty usually reserved for natural laws and death notices. The handler paused, clearly not having expected this particular development in his day. Behind her, Vera heard something that made her heart skip. A low, rumbling sound that was definitely not friendly. All three cubs were on their feet now, and their entire demeanor had shifted. No more uncertainty, no more confused investigation. Pure, focused aggression directed at the handlers threatening their, what? Pack leader? Protector? The female cub moved to Vera's left, the male to her right. The smallest positioned himself directly behind her, but his posture suggested he was ready to go through her rather than around her if necessary. "Well," Vera murmured, "this is interesting." The handler with the energy prod was backing away now, clearly having second thoughts about his career choices. His colleagues were spreading out around the arena's perimeter, trying to find angles that wouldn't require going through an increasingly hostile pack formation. Above them, the crowd had gone silent again. This time, though, it wasn't confusion. It was fascination. They were witnessing something unprecedented, an interspecies pack bond forming in real time. "Handlers, withdraw!" Huleth's voice boomed across the arena. "Cycle the combat stimulants!" Combat stimulants. Vera felt her stomach drop. They were going to drug the cubs into aggression. "Can't have them." Thinking clearly. "Can we?" she said, loud enough for her voice to carry to the viewing platforms. "Might spoil the show if they started making their own decisions about who deserves to die here." Huleth's response was predictably diplomatic. "Increase stimulant levels to maximum." Gas began hissing from vents around the arena's perimeter. Whatever the Nefac were pumping into the air, it was designed to trigger aggressive responses in vorac physiology. The cubs would have no choice. Chemically induced rage would override their natural behavioral patterns and turn them into the killing machines the audience had paid to see. Except, Vera was a xenobiologist who'd spent 15 years studying interspecies communication and animal behavior. She'd worked with creatures whose biochemistry made Terran fauna look simple. And right now, 3 scared juveniles were looking to her for leadership. Time to see if her field experience was worth anything beyond academic credentials. She knelt down and placed her hands on the sand, spreading her fingers wide in what she hoped would register as a calming, grounding gesture. Then she began to hum. Not any particular tune, just a low, steady vibration that she'd learned worked with pack animals across a dozen different species. Something about consistent, non-threatening sound patterns that seemed to resonate with social mammals regardless of evolutionary origin. The female cub responded first, lowering her head until it was level with Vera's. Her breathing began to synchronize with the humming pattern. The male cub followed suit, and finally, the smallest one pressed against Vera's back, his rapid heartbeat gradually slowing to match the rhythm she was maintaining. The combat stimulants were still flowing, but something remarkable was happening. The cubs were using their telepathic link to reinforce the calming influence Vera was providing. Each cub's resistance to the chemical aggression was being amplified by the others, creating a feedback loop that was effectively negating the drug's impact. They were choosing to remain calm. They were choosing to protect rather than attack. The audience was absolutely beside itself. This wasn't entertainment. This was a complete subversion of everything the arena was supposed to represent. Several Nefac nobles were shouting demands for refunds. Others were placing increasingly frantic bets on what would happen next. Huleth, meanwhile, was approaching what could charitably be described as a complete psychological breakdown. "Override the containment protocols," he roared. "Flood the arena. Gas them all." "Sir," one of his subordinates replied, with the careful tone of someone delivering news to an unstable superior, "if we flood the arena with lethal gas, we'll kill the human before the cubs can tear her apart. The spectacle will be—" "I don't care about the spectacle." Huleth's composure was officially history. "I want that human dead. And I want those cubs back, under control." That's when Vera realized something important. This wasn't really about entertainment at all. The vorac cubs weren't just arena attractions. They were weapons. Telepathically linked pack hunters that could be drugged into compliance and deployed against enemy forces. The arena was a testing ground, a way to refine their conditioning and prove their effectiveness. But a human xenobiologist had just demonstrated that their conditioning could be broken, that their natural intelligence and social instincts could override chemical manipulation, and that they could form protective bonds with other species. In the space of 30 minutes, Vera had accidentally rendered an entire weapons program useless. No wonder Huleth was having a bad day. "You know what your problem is?" Vera called up to the command platform, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet arena. "You never bothered to study your weapons properly. These cubs aren't naturally aggressive pack hunters. They're social mammals who've been traumatized into violence. And trauma-based conditioning only works as long as the subject doesn't have better options." She gestured to the 3 cubs, who were now arranged in a perfect defensive formation around her. "They're protecting me because I'm the first person who's ever treated them like intelligent beings instead of biological machinery. You created loyal soldiers, all right. They're just not loyal to you." Huleth's response was to grab an energy rifle from the nearest guard and take aim at the arena floor. He never got the chance to fire. The smallest cub, the one who'd been pressed against Vera's back, exploded into motion. 6 legs gave him traction that defied physics, allowing him to cover the distance to the arena wall in roughly the time it takes to blink. His claws found purchase on the vertical surface, and he scrambled up the wall like gravity was more of a suggestion than a law. Huleth barely had time to look surprised before 30 pounds of extremely unhappy predator landed on his firing platform. The energy rifle went spinning into the crowd. Huleth went down in a tangle of limbs, claws, and what sounded like creative profanity in at least 3 languages. "Now that," Vera said to the remaining cubs, "is what I call initiative." The arena's emergency systems activated, flooding the space with alarm klaxons and automated warnings about containment breaches. Security forces began pouring in from access tunnels around the perimeter, armed with enough firepower to level a small city. Vera looked at the 2 cubs still beside her, then up at the chaos surrounding Huleth's platform, then at the advancing security teams. "Ladies," she said, "I think it's time we discussed alternative career options." The female cub tilted her head in an unmistakable question. "I'm thinking less gladiatorial combat and more aggressive problem-solving with a focus on personal freedom. Interested?" Both cubs showed their teeth in expressions that absolutely nobody would mistake for smiles. Above them, their brother was systematically destroying Huleth's command platform, while the war commander shouted increasingly desperate orders that nobody seemed particularly interested in following. The security forces were closing in, but they were moving with the careful uncertainty of people who'd suddenly realized their job description might not have adequately covered this particular scenario. Vera stood up, brushed sand off her clothes, and looked around the arena with the expression of someone considering real estate options. "You know what this place needs?" she said to no one in particular. "Better management." Then she started walking toward the nearest security team, with 2 Vorthak cubs flanking her and a third one busy redecorating the command platform in a style that could best be described as apocalyptic modern. The security team, faced with an advancing human who showed absolutely no fear and 2 predators who were clearly taking their cues from her, did what security teams throughout the galaxy do when confronted with situations outside their training parameters. They hesitated. And in that moment of hesitation, Vera smiled with the kind of expression that suggested she was about to make everyone's day significantly more interesting. "Gentlemen," she said, "I believe we need to have a conversation about proper animal care standards." The lead security officer, a veteran who'd probably seen enough action to know when a situation was spiraling beyond salvage, held up one hand to halt his team's advance. His other hand remained firmly on his weapon, but Vera noticed he hadn't actually drawn it yet. "Human," he said carefully, "you will order your companions to stand down immediately." "Oh, I'm afraid you've misunderstood our relationship dynamic," Vera replied, maintaining her casual walking pace. "I don't give them orders. We make group decisions based on mutual respect and shared goals." The female cub beside her made a sound that was probably the Vorthak equivalent of snorting with amusement. The male cub's attention was divided between the security team and the ongoing chaos on Huleth's platform, where his brother appeared to be expressing his artistic vision through strategic destruction. "Then convince them to surrender," the officer tried again, though his heart clearly wasn't in it. "Surrender to what, exactly?" Vera gestured around the arena. "Continued imprisonment? More combat conditioning? Chemical torture designed to override their natural behavioral patterns?" She shook her head. "I'm afraid that's not really an option anymore." What she didn't mention, but was becoming increasingly clear as she observed the cub's body language, was that their telepathic connection was evolving. The bond that had started as simple pack coordination was deepening into something more complex. She could sense their emotional states, their decision-making, processes, even fragments of their communication with each other. It should have been impossible. Humans weren't telepathic, and interspecies mental links were purely theoretical. Yet somehow, through proximity and shared stress and genuine mutual concern, something unprecedented was happening. The cubs weren't just accepting her as pack leader, they were integrating her into their telepathic network. And through that connection, Vera was learning things about Vorthak that no Xenobiologist had ever documented. The cubs had names for themselves, not in any verbal language, but in conceptual frameworks that translated roughly as Swift Claw, Bright Mind, and Fierce Whisper. Swift Claw was the smallest, the one currently redecorating Huleth's platform. Bright Mind was the female beside her, whose intelligence was considerably higher than even Vera had initially estimated. Fierce Whisper was the male, whose protective instincts were so strong they bordered on territorial obsession. More importantly, through their shared memories, she was learning about their mother. The cubs had been taken from their birth pack when they were barely weaned. Their mother, a matriarch named something that roughly translated as Starfall on Silent Waters, had been captured along with them. But where the cubs had been sent to the arena for conditioning, their mother had been sent elsewhere. The laboratory levels beneath the arena complex, where Nefac scientists were studying Vorthak telepathic abilities, trying to understand how to enhance and control them for military applications. Where Starfall on Silent Waters was dying, slowly and in considerable pain, as researchers pushed her mental capabilities beyond their natural limits. Vera's expression shifted from casual confidence to something considerably more dangerous. "You know what?" she said to the security officer, who was still waiting for some kind of rational resolution to this situation. "I've changed my mind about that conversation." Without warning, she broke into a run, not away from the security team, but directly toward them. Brightmind and Fierce Whisper flanked her instantly, their movements so perfectly coordinated it looked choreographed. The security team, faced with a charging human backed by two apex predators, made the entirely reasonable decision to dive for cover behind the nearest arena barriers. But Vera wasn't interested in the security team anymore. She was heading for the access tunnels that led to the lower levels of the complex, guided by memories that weren't quite her own but felt absolutely authentic. Her telepathic connection with the cubs was becoming stronger by the minute, and through their link to their brother Swiftclaw, she could sense his location as he finished expressing his displeasure with Huleth's decorating choices and began making his way down to rejoin them. The arena's automated defense systems were activating now. Energy barriers, containment fields, and automated weapon platforms that tracked movement with mechanical precision. But the systems had been designed to contain prisoners within the arena, not to stop a coordinated escape attempt by beings who understood their operational parameters. Brightmind's intelligence included an intuitive grasp of electronic systems that bordered on supernatural. She could sense electromagnetic fields, identify power sources, and predict system responses with accuracy that would have impressed a computer technician. Fierce Whisper's protective instincts extended to tactical awareness that any military commander would have envied. He knew exactly where threats were coming from, how to position his pack for maximum advantage, and when to press an attack versus when to withdraw and regroup. And Swiftclaw had just discovered that Nefac automated weapon platforms weren't designed to track targets moving vertically along walls at impossible speeds. The combination was devastating. They carved through the arena's defenses like a force of nature, guided by shared intelligence and motivated by a goal that transcended personal survival. They were going to find Starfall on Silent Waters, and they were going to make sure she lived to see her cubs again. Behind them, the arena crowd was in complete chaos. Half the spectators were demanding refunds, the other half were trying to place bets on whether the escapees would make it to the lower levels before security could organize an effective response. War Commander Huleth, meanwhile, was still trapped on his destroyed platform, shouting orders that nobody was following and threats that nobody was taking seriously. The revolution, Vera realized, had officially begun. The laboratory levels beneath the arena complex had clearly been designed by someone with a doctorate in making everything as ominous as possible, and a minor in excessive use of emergency lighting. Vera and her pack, because that's what they were now, a genuine interspecies pack with her as the unlikely alpha, moved through corridors that looked like they'd been decorated by someone who thought medical facilities should resemble haunted houses. Emergency klaxons wailed constantly. Red warning lights strobed with epileptic enthusiasm, and automated announcements kept declaring containment breaches in at least 6 different languages. "You know," Vera muttered, as they navigated around another automated defense turret that Brightmind had somehow convinced to shoot at the ceiling instead of them. "For a supposedly advanced military organization, your security protocols have some serious design flaws." Swiftclaw, who had rejoined them after his impromptu remodeling project upstairs, made a sound that was probably agreement mixed with satisfaction. Through their telepathic link, Vera could sense his emotional state. Pure, focused determination with undertones of barely controlled rage. All three cubs were broadcasting the same basic message. Find Mother. Protect Mother. Eliminate anything that threatened Mother. Simple, direct, and absolutely non-negotiable. The connection was getting stronger by the minute. Vera could now distinguish between their individual mental voices, sense their tactical assessments, and even access fragmentary memories from their early life. It was like having three highly intelligent, telepathically linked consultants providing real-time strategic advice. Also, it was making her head hurt in ways that definitely weren't covered in standard xenobiology training. They reached the main laboratory complex through a maintenance access tunnel that Fierce Whisper had located using senses that apparently extended well beyond the normal mammalian range. The door was secured with both electronic locks and physical barriers that would have stopped most escape attempts. Unfortunately for the Nefac, most escape attempts didn't include a xenobiologist with three telepathically linked pack hunters who'd spent the last hour developing an increasingly sophisticated understanding of Nefac technology. Brightmind placed one paw against the door's control panel and closed her eyes. Through their shared connection, Vera could sense her probing the electronic systems, mapping circuit pathways, identifying the specific frequencies that would override the security protocols. 30 seconds later, the door slid open with a soft hiss. "Show off," Vera murmured, but she was genuinely impressed. Brightmind's technical intuition was operating at levels that bordered on supernatural. The laboratory beyond was a masterpiece of scientific brutality. Row upon row of containment cells held various alien species in different stages of experimentation. Most were unconscious, suspended in nutrient solutions while monitoring equipment tracked their vital signs. Others were awake but restrained, connected to devices that were clearly designed to measure and manipulate neural activity. At the center of the complex, in a containment unit that was easily 3 times larger than any of the others, lay Starfall on silent waters. Even through the transparent aluminum walls of her prison, even connected to more monitoring equipment than Vera had seen outside of a major medical facility, the matriarch was unmistakably magnificent. She was easily twice the size of her cubs, with fur that shifted from deep silver to midnight black in patterns that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. Her 6 legs were powerful enough to carry her considerable mass with the fluid grace that characterized all vorac movement. Her head was elegant, intelligent, and currently turned toward them with an expression of surprised recognition. Through the cub's telepathic network, Vera felt the emotional impact of that reunion hit like a physical blow. Joy, relief, desperate love, and underneath it all, a deep, bone-deep exhaustion that spoke of months of suffering. Starfall on Silent Waters was dying. The Nefac researchers had been pushing her, telepathic abilities far beyond their natural limits, trying to map the neural pathways that enabled interspecies communication. The process was slowly burning out her brain, and from what Vera could sense through the cub's connection, she had perhaps days left before the damage became irreversible. "Mother." Swiftclaw's mental voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the telepathic network with the force of a shout. Starfall on Silent Waters lifted her head, and her response flooded through all of them. "My cubs. My brave, foolish cubs. You should not have come here." "We brought help," Brightmind replied, and Vera felt herself being introduced into the telepathic conversation in a way that was both startling and oddly natural. The matriarch's attention focused on Vera with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Being telepathically examined by an adult vorac was like having someone rifle through your thoughts with the casual thoroughness of a professional librarian. "Human," Starfall on Silent Waters said finally, and her mental voice carried overtones of respect mixed with puzzlement. "You have made pack bond with my cubs. This should not be possible." "Yeah, well," Vera replied, discovering that she could respond telepathically when she focused properly. "I've been having a day full of things that shouldn't be possible. Let's add interspecies telepathic communication to the list and worry about the scientific implications later." The matriarch's amusement rippled through the network. "Indeed. Release me, human pack leader, and I will show you what adult vorac can accomplish when properly motivated." That's when the laboratory's main doors burst open, and War Commander Huleth arrived with what appeared to be half the station's military complement. "Enough!" Huleth roared, his earlier composure completely abandoned. "Secure the specimens. Kill the human. Activate the neural dampers." The cubs immediately formed a defensive triangle around Vera, but she could sense their uncertainty. Adult vorac might be apex predators, but juvenile vorac, facing trained military forces with energy weapons, were at a significant disadvantage. "Wait," Vera said, raising one hand. "Before we start the wholesale slaughter, I have a question." Huleth gestured for his forces to hold position, apparently curious, despite his rage. "Speak quickly, human. How much did you invest in this research program?" The question clearly wasn't what Huleth had expected. "What?" "The telepathic enhancement research, the arena testing, the weapons development program. How much did the Nefac consortium invest in all of this?" "Billions of credits," Huleth replied automatically, then caught himself. "Why does this matter?" "Because you're about to lose all of it," Vera said, with the kind of cheerful certainty usually reserved for weather reports and tax statements. "See, here's what you never bothered to research. Vorac telepathic abilities aren't just communication networks. They're learning systems. Adaptive, evolutionary, constantly improving." She gestured to the cubs around her. "These three have been developing new capabilities every hour since we formed our pack bond. They can interface with electronic systems, coordinate tactical responses across multiple sensory spectrums, and adapt to threats faster than your weapons can target them." Huleth's expression suggested he was beginning to suspect where this conversation was going. "But the really interesting part," Vera continued, "is what happens when young vorac reconnect with a mature matriarch after extended separation. All those enhanced abilities they've developed, they get shared across the entire telepathic network." She smiled. "Congratulations, War Commander. You've just created the most dangerous pack-hunting unit in galactic history." Starfall on Silent Waters rose to her feet inside her containment cell, and despite months of torture and experimentation, she moved with fluid power that made the laboratory's reinforced walls seem suddenly inadequate. "My cubs," she said, her telepathic voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through every piece of electronic equipment in the complex. "Show them what you have learned." What happened next could generously be described as a demonstration of why you should never underestimate the learning curve of intelligent predators with a personal grudge. Brightmind interfaced with the laboratory's computer systems and turned every automated defense system against the Nefac forces. Fierce Whisper coordinated movement patterns that allowed all 4 vorac to occupy the same space as a dozen armed soldiers without ever being in the same place as their weapons. Swiftclaw discovered that Nefac body armor had some interesting structural weaknesses when approached from unexpected angles. And Starfall on Silent Waters, freed from her containment cell by a security override, that Brightmind accomplished while simultaneously disabling 6 weapons platforms, proceeded to demonstrate why adult vorac were generally considered mythical by most galactic civilizations. They weren't mythical. They were just very, very good at making sure there weren't any witnesses. Huleth managed to get off exactly 1 shot with his energy rifle before Starfall on Silent Waters reached him. The shot went wide because he was too busy processing the fact that something the size of a small shuttle had just moved faster than his targeting systems could track. 5 minutes later, the laboratory was quiet except for the soft humming of life support systems and the occasional electronic chirp from monitoring equipment. Vera looked around at the aftermath and decided that her career in xenobiology was probably going to require some significant updates to her resume. "So," she said to Starfall on Silent Waters, who was systematically freeing the other experimental subjects from their containment cells, "what's the plan now?" The matriarch paused in her work to look at Vera with an expression of profound gratitude. "Now, human pack leader, we go home, and we ensure that no one ever treats our kind this way again." "Fair enough," Vera agreed, "but I should probably mention that home for me is about 15 star systems from here, and I'm currently between spaceships." Swiftclaw made a sound that was definitely amusement. Through their telepathic link, his message was clear. Pack leaders traveled with the pack. Distance was irrelevant. 3 months later, Vera established the first interspecies communication research station on a pleasant world in the Kepler system. Her research into vorac social structures and telepathic abilities revolutionized xenobiology, led to first contact protocols with a dozen previously unknown species, and earned her tenure at 3 different universities simultaneously. The Nefac consortium, meanwhile, suffered a complete military and economic collapse when word spread that their ultimate weapons program had been dismantled by 1 human xenobiologist and 3 teenage predators who just wanted their mother back. And every night, when the station's work was done and the research data was filed away, Vera would sit on her back porch and watch 4 vorac hunt together across the grasslands, their telepathic communication creating harmonies that seemed to make the very air shimmer with contentment. Pack, it turned out, was a concept that transcended species boundaries. Who knew